welcome everybody. This is our official mini conference that was initiated, of course, by CLA, but the cancellation meant that we needed to be a little bit more creative. And here we are at our mini conference. Thank you for being here. Thank you for adjusting. And thank you all for just all the good work that you do. I want to make sure that we are recording this, and so that if you do have to leave for any reason, I know that there's some appointments people have to make, you can still benefit from the recording. That will, it doesn't take too long for that to happen. So don't worry if that happens to you. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Tyechia Thompson, who's going to be chairing the session today. And I am very happy to say that she is the newly appointed Assistant Professor of English and Digital Humanities. Tyechia, that's what I say?
Congratulations.
Okay, who is now, so she's gone through that process. Those of you who have questions about how you do that, she's probably now can tell you exactly how to do it. But anyway, congratulations, Tyechia, and thank you for joining us as our chair today. You can view her work, and she'll tell you a little bit about that, her work. She has, of course, done a great deal of DH work, and her publication is on the Afro-PWW website. Marilyn, you can tell us that if you want to. But anyway, or send an information via chat to everybody. But some of you already know it. I'm going to turn it over to Tyechia so that we can have as much time for discussion as possible. And thanks again, everybody, for being here, some of whom are still joining us.
All right, thank you. It's going to be a slight change in the schedule in terms of how it was listed. It was Virginia and Vernacular, then Black mapping Black travel, then alternate paths. We're going to begin with alternate paths to respect the schedules of everyone. And the three people on the panel, I'll introduce them. Dr. Seretha D. Williams is a professor of English at Augusta University in Georgia and a managing editor of Third Stone Journal. She is a member of the working group to support the Society for the Study of American Women Writers, Recovery Hub, and a digital humanities project that received a 50,000 NEH grant, and the Digital Humanities Fellow at her college. Dr. Williams is writing a book on Margaret Walker's unpublished manuscript, Goose Island. We also have Rochelle Spencer. She's an author of Afro-Surrealism and a co-editor of All About Skin, short fiction by women of color. She teaches at Fisk University. And we have Conrad Pegues. He's assistant professor at Tennessee State University and a public services librarian at Paul Meeks Library. The title of their presentation is Alternate Paths and Black Futures, Reading the Black Book Interactive Project Database Using an Afrofuturistic Lens. And I will hand it off to them.
Good afternoon. So let me get prepped, and I'm starting out. Let's see if I can get my share screen behaving. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. All right, so I was a part of the bibliography group, and a part of what we were tasked with doing initially was to add some bibliographic information to some of the authors and texts included in the database. So many of those texts, actually, not a lot of people have been writing about those texts. There's not a lot necessarily known about those specific authors. And so one of the things that we were attempting to do was to see what was out there and to kind of cull that information and curate it and put that together. So that was kind of the beginning of the project. As we continued to talk, we started thinking about what could we actually do within the database since we have this access to this amazing database. What can we do with this? And so Rochelle and I already had some interest in Afrofuturism, and we kind of pulled Conrad along with this, but he is amazing and great. I can't wait until you see what he has contributed to this project. but we were already kind of thinking about that and what could we do actually with the database. And so when you're thinking about Afrofuturism, one of the problems is you know, which Afrofuturism, is it Afro-surrealism? Is it African futurism? You know, exactly what is it? Is it just Black science fiction? So we had to kind of navigate and think through exactly what is it that we mean and how will we be able to identify a text as Afrofuturist without the label Afrofuturism in the database. And so one of the things that I thought to do was to maybe come up with a keyword list so that if we wanted to identify those texts, we can have some kind of, I don't know, not necessarily a controlled vocabulary, but at least a curated vocabulary to help us to identify those works in the database. So this is easier said than done. And I was pretty ambitious. I was a newly minted library student, just finishing up my program, thinking about how you search through catalogs and database creations. And so I was very enthusiastic. I still am. However, I realized just how daunting a task it was going to be to try to come up with these words. So what I ended up doing was looking at the Amazon keyword list for science fiction. I looked at the Oxford English dictionaries. They have a project on science fiction words. And I was able to use those as a foundation to start out, you know, just getting words like, you know, what are some words I should be looking for, like spaceship or, you know, planets or, you know, comets, like what should I be looking for? But then as you go into the actual database itself, what you find is that you will, you'll see that some of those words will not appear in the database, but that doesn't necessarily exclude those texts from being science fiction, Black science fiction, Afrofuturism. There are other words in the database that actually speak maybe more specifically with reference to cultural aspect. And so what I have here, we've created a scalar book just to kind of pull our information together. And so at the very top of the page, you are seeing a little word cloud that I created. It's hard to see that that's supposed to be a spaceship. I don't know. When I initially did it, it looked very much like a spaceship, but once I put it in, it doesn't look like that. But let's pretend it's a spaceship. And so those words in the word cloud are the words that I ended up finding and doing searches for in the actual HBW database. So the question that I was attempting to answer was, you know, how do we characterize the language of Afrofuturism to discover instances of Afrofuturism in texts not labeled as such? One of the things that I wanted to make sure is that we wanted to say that maybe a text could be, maybe we wouldn't necessarily label it as Afrofuturism, but it could also be, it may actually have an instance of Afrofuturism in it. And so we didn't want to just kind of rule out this idea of the text as being, you know, significant or insignificant. So we looked at, you know, is the text itself Afrofuturism, or does it have like maybe moments or scenes of Afrofuturism in it? So some of the words that I ended up adding to my keyword list were things like conjure and goofer and hoodoo and root work. Those are not terms that come up on the Amazon keyword list. Those are not terms that you'll find in the Oxford English Dictionary of Science Fiction Words. But those are absolutely words that you will find in the database, and those texts that use those, we found, you know, significant numbers of, significant numbers of kind of Afrofuturist instances. And so I want to just show you, and I already have it pulled up. I have it linked in on the page, but I'll just switch over here to kind of show you what I was doing. So, and again, I just created an Excel file, and what I wanted to do was to go through and search. And I know the file looks really weird. I'll explain why I set it up this way. So you'll see the numbers, you'll see the terms, and you'll see those numbers represent the hits that I found in the database. And what I was trying to do is like look for concordances, you know, not just angel, but angels, not just beam or beams, but also beamed, those kinds of things, and find, you know, how many times are those referenced. Now, of course, just because those words appear in the text doesn't make it an example of Afrofuturism. And so I was just looking at this as a way of kind of starting and maybe discovering some texts that we wouldn't traditionally think of as Afrofuturistic. And so we were able to do some of that. And I'll just kind of show you a couple of those. So let's see, we go over here. Yeah, so things like ray gun don't necessarily appear a lot, but like robots. And so one of the problems with the way that I have kind of presented the data here is that, you know, it's not sussed out, because sometimes you have like a specific book that will have, you know, a lot of those. One of the things as we develop this project that we will do is to actually include those examples, at least the sentence, and identify the text and the author with it. But right now we just have the number of hits. Okay, I'm gonna go back. Go back. All right, so that's one thing. And let me just kind of scroll down. So just looking in the database, and this is not all of them. I just wanted to give you some samples. So searching alien, we came up with a number of texts like Charles Chestnut's House Behind the Cedars, James Nelson Coleman's Null Frequency Impulsor, Paul Laurence Dunbar, the Fanatics, and the list goes on. Of course, like Sutton Griggs. So some of these authors are people that we have already kind of identified with Afrofuturism, and then others we have not yet identified as Afrofuturism. So I just think that this is a really kind of interesting way of just discovering opportunities for research and maybe kind of studying those texts together. All right, move up. All right, so go to the next one. All right, so in addition to creating the keyword search, one of the things that I was working on already was I'm the managing editor and co-founder for an Afrofuturist journal. It's called Third Stone. And as I was kind of working in BBIP and trying to get Third Stone off the ground, I found this as a kind of a symbiotic relationship. It absolutely participating in BBIP informed the way that I was kind of crafting the message and the purpose of this journal. And so I wanted to just kind of talk about two different ways that I thought it was important that I kind of pulled together those two interests. So one is the living bibliography. A number of times we have been talking about the fact that, you know, we need to reclaim text, we need to recover text, we need to preserve text, we need to make these texts available to the general public. And initially, my team and I, we were just kind of thinking about Third Stone as a way of talking about like new content. But through my work with this program, I shifted my thinking and started thinking that Third Stone could become a hub for Afrofuturism, and how could we begin to curate the material that had already been published. And so one of the things that we are now doing is to have a living, what I'm calling a living bibliography. It's an annotated bibliography, and we are inviting individuals to actually write peer review annotations that will be peer reviewed, and this will be, you know, published in the journal. And we actually have Clarissa West White, who is going to be the content editor for that section. And I wanted to just kind of show you, because this is the list of, and it's not complete, but we started this list looking at some of the text in the BBIP database. And so as I'm imagining this relationship continuing, oh, come on. I'm imagining that we will have individuals who will read those texts and then write annotations, and then hopefully other individuals will begin to say, well, hey, well, maybe we need to read that text, or maybe we need to do some kind of scholarship on that text. And so this will be something that will continue, and we'll just continue to build and to include the text in the HBW database ongoing. The other point that I wanted to make quickly was to just kind of talk about this idea of like metadata. One of the assignments we had was to kind of think about like ways that we could come up with like different metadatas to capture things that aren't necessarily captured in traditional metadata. And so one of the ways that this work with the key word list will inform my work with Third Stone is to kind of think about like how these keywords can be curated into a vocabulary list to assist researchers interested in reading or studying Afrofuturism. And so I have proposed that we will make sure that we are using some of those keywords as we find them, and connect those to not only the annotated bibliographies that come in, but also the actual submissions that we get from scholars around the world. And so here at the bottom, I just included an example of one of the annotations that I did. We were just trying to, tell people, or to show them what, a possibility would be. And so this one is actually a piece of scholarship kind of talking about it. And so in the database, in the bibliography, people can do like creative works, it can do scholarship, music, art exhibits, individual pieces of art, websites, so on and so forth. And so we just want to collect that information. And then lastly, I just want to go back to what we were talking about as a whole in terms of the group. We were really kind of interested in this whole idea of using the digital corpus as a way of going back and maybe kind of rewriting. A lot of people are really distraught or bothered by the fact that we're using this term, Mark Derry's term Afrofuturism, and people are kind of pushing back on that. And, and I think rightfully so. And so we were having some of those conversations. But I have always made the argument that African Americans in particular have always had this kind of magically real, or this kind of supernatural element to the culture. And I think it is a very valid line of research for us to actually kind of go back and find these instances of the speculative in African American literature. Thank you.
And is Rochelle or Conrad going to?
Here. When I originally did this, I wanted to build something that gave a sense of what we're really doing in the culture. And so I built a scalar to give a sense of how I really encountered, starting to see how far back we go as far as re-envisioning who we are. And I was looking at a lot of research, and they always go to W.B. Du Bois in the comment. But actually, Sutton Griggs would be back even further. Seretha goes back even further when she's looking at how she expands upon the word. But I just wanted to look at that. And one of the reasons I really missed the CLA, because I wanted to encourage people who teach classes to use some of these texts so they can be reified and they can become part of the canon, as opposed to people simply that people don't know. it's not that people are erasing folks or dismissing them and they don't know. I was looking at a guy recently who was a black guy who was explaining to an Asian guy where Afrofuturism came from, and he told him Black Panther, the movie. So it's like, it's much deeper than that. And I couldn't be on that to just tell him like, no, but but I wanted to look at some of the things that we're looking at. I just went ahead and pulled out a lot of the texts that are in the BBIP piece, and it looks like a small number. It's not. I left out some of the people like Tananarive Due, Samuel Delaney, and Octavia Butler, because many of us, even if I've never read Tananarive Due, but I know her. When somebody call her name, I'm like, yeah. But I wanted to split them up just in case people wanted to teach and pick particular texts that they may want to use or incorporate in their curriculums. So I split them up into apocryphal, dystopian, and utopian, and went back all the way so that you can kind of get an idea what might work for your class if you wanted to do this, or if you just want to read on your own. I did magical realism, and I did monsters in them, because a lot of times people don't think we write about vampires and things of that nature, and we have been writing about them the whole time. Myth making, folklore, allegory, and I split up, of course, the biggest piece would be sci-fi, fantasy, and speculative. And there's this big debate about what's speculative, what's not. But I think Margaret, who wrote the book that just came on, with The Handmaid's Tale, I think she created this term speculative, but I'm not sure. We get so much into who did what when. But I just wanted to pull all of these out. And one of my favorites, I didn't see Dumas' Echo Tree in the listing, but there are two lists, and so sometimes I miss stuff looking at one more so than the other when I was literally going down, picking them out. And just to show how much this has been a team effort, someone previous to me had identified some of the pieces as, within Afrofuturistic terms. And so I just went ahead and pulled them on out in a list separate from that. And of course, I think there are many more pieces that need to be documented or digitized that would fit in this as well. So this is an ongoing project. But I just wanted to pull this out and just let people know this is what's actually available to you, and this is what can be used in your classes. I like to write, so I got on some of my soapboxes, and I think that's Seretha, and looking on with hers, as well as looking at some of the things that we were writing about. I like Earth, Wind, and Fire, and I like to use the thing because we have always been looking forward, backwards, and going in different places. And so I wanted to look at some of the ideas of how we see Afrofuturism, how it looks. A lot of times when we do Afrofuturism, we're doing myth making. We're literally creating ourselves and interspersing ourselves into the dialogue that we've been left out of. But this group has also pushed me to look at criticism, how I critique Afrofuturism and where we're left out. I'm a huge Star Trek fan, and I was looking at the original series, and I pulled out 5 episodes where Lieutenant Uhura, who I'm a big fan of, was corrected by Captain Kirk. And I had to look at how do Black girls or Black boys see that when you get one character who is in a series who's a Black female who was corrected, she's done something wrong. So he did it 4 times. Mr. Spock did it 1 time, but she corrected Mr. Spock. So it's these particular pieces that I like to look at and see what kind of images we're putting forth when we put this information out there, and how do we get beyond it. And I have a term that I like to coin that I call, sometimes we think we've moved beyond the white gaze, as Toni Morrison puts it, but sometimes our imagination is still occupied, because we don't know how to move Black characters to the fore or put them in other venues. So we create Black Superman, Black Wonder Woman, especially in comics and things of that nature. And so we look at things, we have to learn how to create our own, push ourselves forward, and remove our imagination from being occupied by white supremacy and the white gaze. So these are just some of the things that I was doing, and just, things that I wrote. I think I got several on here. So Seretha's got his stuff on here. So it's just a hodgepodge. If you see something on there, and it's actually, I'm not finished. I got some other stuff I've got to say. So looking at this, it made me look at a paper that I have to write. I thought, assume someone would have written this about Octavia Butler's Mind of My Mind, and the book set with Doro and Anyanwu, I think I got the name correct, and how basically people have approached it from every section, but they have not paid attention to the fact that she structured both of those characters, one off of a bacteria and one off of a virus, and how those things are said to have created how human beings came into being, with the collaboration between a bacteria and a virus, and how she shows that in the book. So there's something I'm working on to bring out other ideas and expand on the other ideas of Afrofuturism and how we can look at Black literature.
Okay, I think I was just saying that I thought those were excellent presentations about what the team has been working on, and my colleagues, Seretha and Conrad, have been amazing. Grant, and we're trying to host a virtual Afrofuturism conference. And with this whole idea of social distancing and sheltering in place, we think the virtual Afrofuturism conference could offer an opportunity for people across the globe to talk about issues related to Afrofuturism. And we're hoping to bring in artists, writers, scientists into a discussion about how Afrofuturism addresses larger social issues. You see in some of the Afrofuturist texts that are being created, people are thinking about the environment and climate change. And we want to, people are also thinking about race, discrimination, issues about sexual orientation and gender, so disability. So we see a lot of these issues that are being discussed in Afrofuturism, and perhaps as we think about Blackness and we think about people of color, and we start to think about how voices haven't always been part of some of these conversations. So I think one of the things that Conrad said was moving towards the center, people of color, moving those conversations towards the center. And Seretha had mentioned the importance of thinking about other forms of Afrofuturism. And that's one of the things we want to do when we have our conference. We have a board that includes John Keane, Aseli Solomon, and some really, really strong writers and artists, and we're excited about it. So we're currently revamping it, and we're asking the BBIP scholars, past, present, and future, to submit ideas and to talk to us about it. You can feel free to email me at roreader14@gmail.com and give us ideas, share your influences, and share some of the things that you think would be central to a conversation about Afrofuturism and social change. But I want to leave the discussion open to questions. So are there any questions from anyone about what we've been talking about? No questions?
Well, I don't have a question specifically about your project. I just wanted to ask in general, are we connected at all to AdHume?
Who's speaking?
It's Jada. My name is Jada.
You're saying we as in BBIP, or we as in the group?
Just in general, the group, yes.
I have connections to AdHume.
Okay, I just wanted, as far as publicizing those ventures you were talking about, that was my question, yeah.
I had a question if there was some time.
Yes, there's time. I figured we could give each group about 10 minutes for questions. That'll be about 40 minutes a group. And then if we had a couple of questions at the end, we could ask larger questions to everyone.
Okay, I'll just keep it short. I was curious when you were talking about Afrofuturism, how the supernatural elements that Conrad was talking about is conflated with the specifically utopian elements. I mean, is there a risk, you think, of combining folklore with futuristic elements, or should they be kept separate?
I'll take that question. Hello.
Hey.
So yeah, I mean, so this is the debate. We continue to struggle with this whole idea, and actually, some of the writers that I spoke with, whose writing actually is identified as Afrofuturism, they resist that very label. And so, absolutely, you're right that when we are kind of going back and mining these texts and kind of thinking through these issues of, like, is mythology folklore? We're blending or fusing or just blurring or even obliterating the actual categories of these genres. So yes, it is dangerous, and so that was why we wanted to begin to maybe have some kind of a word. And I don't know that we haven't defined Afrofuturism. What I was attempting to do is to come up with some characteristics, some shared characteristics that maybe at some point we can all agree. So this is a new, not really new, but in terms of like study, like critical study, we're just beginning to do that. And so I think that maybe having collocations, having keywords, having a controlled vocabulary will begin to, start getting people to think, exactly what is this thing. And so that was just like the impetus. We're so far away from it. And then I even believe that, I don't know if we'll ever totally agree with it, but if we're going to continue to say that this is, a new area, we need to have some way to talk about it. And so that's why I wanted to at least come up with the keyword list.
Yeah, and I think it's a productive tension too. I mean, I think one of the key features of Afrofuturist fiction, however broad the category might be, is it uses the tension between between folklore and futurism very productively. It's not typically antithetical, the two things. I mean, I think that's one of the key features of it. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
If I might add, one of the things that I wanted to add with that is that just because we don't understand it does not mean it's not a science or it's not a reality. Mm-hmm. I include Beloved in Afrofuturism, the ghost. But just because we don't understand what ghost means, it may have something to do with multiple realities going on at once. And that is a scientific term. And I think of somebody like Cotton Mather. He had an enslaved Black man named Onesimus. And there was a pox going through the colonies at the time. This enslaved Black man said, Onesimus told him, what you need to do is buy the pox. Take some of the pox from another person, imbibe it, and it'll help save you. This was an African man who brought this particular technique to America before, Pasteur. So, and now we know this does actually work with building up antibodies. And Cotton Mather did it, and a lot of people survived because of that. We didn't have the science for what he told him. This is an African man who brought this particular mythology and, his folk medicine with him. It worked. So just because we don't have the terminology or the science to prove it does not mean it's invalid. That's why I include all of it.
Thank you.
So it was a thread in the chat about the use of Twitter. And I just wanted to get consent from the first group if some of the information that you shared in your link could be distributed on social media. I see nods. I just wanted to see.
I'm great with that. Yes.
Okay. And for the second group,
and I'll put the link in the chat also.
I already did it for you.
You did? Okay. Okay. Good.
I'm fine with it as well.
For the second group, Marina and Eliseo, I just wanted to get affirmation if you are okay with disseminating any information that you say or provide on social media as well.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, we
okay.
consent.
So I'll introduce you now. Thank you. Eliseo and Marina have a different title, so I'll start with their title and then I'll introduce them. Their new title is Porches as Sites of Citizenship, using the BBIP digital archive to illuminate third spaces in the writings of Black women from the South. Marina del Sol is an interdisciplinary scholar with a PhD from the Americo Padres Center for Cultural Studies at the University of Texas at Austin. As a lecturer in the English department at Howard University, she teaches writing courses that are designed to provide students with the skill sets necessary for civic engagement and full participation in the public sphere. Her research focuses on the ways in which language and identity interface with structures of power. Eliseo Jacob has a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin with a background in Afro-Brazilian and Afro-Latin American literary and cultural productions. He is currently a lecturer of Brazilian literature and culture in the Department of World Languages and Cultures at Howard University. His recent publications contextualize literary and cultural representations of Sao Paulo's urban periphery as a part of a larger analysis regarding the relationship between the public sphere to marginalized communities in urban spaces. His current book project, tentatively titled Literary Counterpublics in the Americas, Race, Space, and Citizenship in Sao Paulo and New York, is a comparative study between the litera periferica, it's like periphery, movement in Sao Paulo and the Afro-Latino literary scene in New York. He asserts that these writers' fictional narratives reflect larger social trends in which historical disempowered populations create epistemological spaces that open up new routes, not only for creative expression, but also for political mobilization. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you. All right, is it my turn?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so our title, we've changed it, and we've been on this wonderful journey this year thinking of our project, and this is where we ended up. So by all accounts, Zora Neale Hurston knew how to take up space. The writings she left behind demonstrate that she deeply understood how to step outside of time, how to see things from the inside out, and how to expose rough edges in the most delicate manner. As an interdisciplinary scholar and a multidisciplinary writer, Zora Neale Hurston was able to weave her interlocutors' voices into the text with short narratives that layered intersectional aspects of identity. And I would argue that one part of the reason she was able to do this so effectively was because she deeply understood how to engage both technology and multimodality in order to create a multi-layered representation. As a storyteller, a dancer, a researcher, and a companion, she knew how to capture the moment, that ephemeral encounter that she was able to translate from a direct experience that she recorded using technology available at the time, and into a document that could be preserved and disseminated. Zora's highly effective at writing culture, which is what ethnography and fictional ethnography do. The earlier presentation, we talked about how boundaries, how within actually African-American writing, boundaries are often crossed, right? So you have ethnographic writing, which is writing about culture and nonfiction. And you also have what's evolved into fictional ethnography, where you're writing about culture using a world you've imagined based on social realities. So Zora uses her writing to assert her presence and to lay a claim to spaces of Black life, while also positioning herself within white spaces in interesting ways. Claiming and maintaining space is a highly political act. Public spaces are policed both formally and informally, and Zora was able to step through those boundaries, and she left a record for us to uncover with time. So Eliseo and I are interested in history and placemaking within public discourses, both locally and globally. And right now we are looking at the significance of representations of third spaces on community formation and intellectual exchange. Am I going too fast? This current project calls upon Homi Bhabha's third space theory, which is a post-colonial sociolinguistic theory of identity and community. In the location of culture, Bhabha argues that third spaces are in between spaces where oppressed groups can imagine their liberation. Third spaces are public spaces where people can gather and put aside the concerns of home, which is your first place, and the interior of life that we live, and work, which is the second place that we primarily exist, which is managed by others, right? Third spaces are neutral spaces that can foster democratic process. because they have few formal obligations and regular participants, yet they allow for newcomers and new members, and hierarchy is de-emphasized. The third space is the space where liberation is plotted, sometimes in whispers, and these spaces are places where alternative social structures can be imagined and called into existence. Eliseo's literature, Eliseo's work on marginal literature in Brazil focuses on the bar and the bus stop as places of social discourse in his third spaces, and my own work focuses on youth detention centers as liminal spaces. For this project, we selected the porch-like spaces because they are liminal spaces that mark the boundaries of interiors and exteriors that shape our social discourse. This is a slide that we just created just to, it's my invocation slide. So over the past year, Eliseo and I have had this incredible journey and this precious experience of being a part of the BBIP community. We'd like to thank everyone for providing us with this web of support that's fostered our growth and our intellectual development, both individually and as a team working together. We've appreciated this opportunity. All right, so now to our project. I've told you a little bit about the context of our project, and now we're gonna move into how are we applying this to the BBIP archive, right? Using the Black Book Interactive Project's Corpus, this project looks at Black writers' incorporation of third spaces into their texts. In particular, we are looking at representations of porches by Black women from the South. Engaging grounded theory, this project uses technologies of recovery to illuminate representations of citizens by writers in the corpus. In order to locate trends, this project used the PhiloLogic tool developed by the University of Chicago Textual Optics Lab to data mine. By engaging methods for key term development and text mining, the project uses infographic tools that create representations to highlight patterns and trends within the selected text. This project contributes to the field of Black digital humanities by building on the Black Book Interactive Project's mission, which focuses on conducting data-driven research on Black authorship, linking digital technology with discussions of race, and building a more informed community. So as we developed this project, we originally had started with a project focus because we both have backgrounds to do with Latin America, and we had wanted to look at Black travel, right? And I had this global vision and looking at Black travel around the globe, starting with Latin America. And what we found is, as we went into the archive, we decided we needed to start more with the local. And so we did this by just, and Zora Neale Hurston, we did this by just starting with Zora because I feel she's a good entry point to this foundation. How do you incorporate multimodality? How do you coordinate representation and technology, and thinking of the resources available to you in your time period, right? So what would she be doing if she was here with us today, and how might she be engaging her writing and representational practices? I actually look at her as a writer, but also as a scholar and an academic, right, in terms of creating secondary sources. So anyways, this was the excerpt that we used just as our foundation for going into the archive. I'm gonna read it to you. As I crossed the Maitland-Eatonville Township line, I could see a group on the store porch. I was delighted. The town had not changed, same love of talk and song, so I drove on down there before I stopped. Yes, there was George Thomas, Calvin Daniels, Jack and Charlie Jones, Gene Brazel, B. Mosley, and Seaboard, deep in a game of Florida Flip. All those who were not actually playing were giving advice. Bet straightening, they call it. Hello, boys, I hailed them as I went into neutral. They looked up from the game, and for a moment it looked as if they'd forgotten me. Then B. Mosley said, well, if it ain't Zora Neale Hurston. Then everybody crowded around the car to help greet me. And I chose this excerpt because it gives this sense of place. It gives this sense of social activity. It gives this thick description, right? That's where we started. All right, hold on. I lost track of all right. So my training is in ethnographic methods and writing studies. And for me, the ability to zoom in and zoom out of a text is central to exploring representations of culture as they exist in writing. And so my natural resting place is in the mode of being zoomed out and looking at the bigger picture. As an anthropologist, I'm drawn to the infrastructure of a piece of writing. Eliseo is a literary scholar, and his expertise is both textual analysis and translation make him highly effective at zooming in on a piece of writing. He is also particularly skilled at making connections between zoomed in spaces within a set of texts. And so he's going to talk a little bit about where we went at the next step in our project.
Yeah, so kind of building on what Marina was talking about, this idea of zooming in and zooming out, I feel this is like a really important foundational methodology for our project. And even in the recent PMLA journal, there's a special issue on the digital humanities. And one of the articles talked about this axis of distance and close. And so I feel this is also really important for kind of shaping our project in terms of how we're approaching these texts within the corpus. This is just an image, just as an example. You know, on one side is from the HPW corpus, you know, the OCR scan. On the left is like the PDF. So this idea of being able to like look at the larger text and then zoom in by doing these kind of keyword searches. And so I feel that the PhiloLogic tool is really excellent in that ability to be able to zoom in and out. You know, with the PhiloLogic tool, you can do like these larger macro analysis of like, you know, how often the words or phrases are appearing over, you know, course of years or decades, and to find larger trends. And you can also use that tool to actually kind of zoom in, like for example, using the word porch, and to find, you know, excerpts within novels to see why is that these words appearing and which ways are they appearing and what contexts. So I think the PhiloLogic tool is excellent for this idea of this kind of distance and close readings. And so talking a little bit about our methodology, of how we kind of came around to this idea of the porch. Kind of like what Marina's saying, we're interested in these kind of like in-between spaces between the exterior and the interior. And we actually had a list of keywords. So we ended up using porch, but we had certain other words like fence, gate, stoop, steps. So kind of seeing how are these words appearing. Initially I just started with a general search of the keywords just to kind of see, you know, how often they're appearing and what ways are they appearing. And it's true, like porch was the one that came up a lot. It came up, I think, close to like 2,300 times within the PhiloLogic search. The word, like, for example, stoop only came up like 300 times. And the thing is too, like when you're doing these searches, when you're kind of like zooming in, I noticed too, you have to be careful with the context. For example, like the word stoop, I know sometimes could be not just the noun, but like as a verb too. Like half the time it was like, oh, the person's stooping to the left or stooping to the right. So that was also kind of like when I'm zooming in is saying, you know, how are the words being used? But so within this search, we felt like porch was actually the one that was really kind of standing out to us as something, was this like important space to do with how African-American culture is represented in these kind of everyday contexts. And so as I started focusing more on porch, I used the approximate filter to match similar items. So, you know, I started finding other searches like porches or porch steps that were affiliated with the word porch. And so that kind of really expanded more findings. And then after that, I was needing to see, okay, well, what kind of text, what kind of trends am I looking at? So I started to use the time series filter within the PhiloLogic tool to kind of see, are there any larger trends going on within the text? And one thing that I remember from our training with Hoyt, you know, he kind of showed us this idea of the relative frequency, you know, because sometimes we get this idea that, oh, there's a lot more times this word is appearing at a certain time period, but that could just be because there's more text being produced, you know, later on, like in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So the relative filter would really help with like seeing, you know, or writers earlier periods doing as much as later periods. So that kind of helped me to actually start identifying some writers, especially like the late 30s, early 40s, and the late 70s and early 80s. And it was in this that I started to find actually several women writers. And the thing was that initially, I wasn't initially looking for female writers initially, but I noticed that as I found some of the ones that actually had large numbers of mentions to porch, some of these novels, as I did kind of zoom in and start to see these ethnographic fictional narratives, I saw that they're kind of following the tradition of Zora Neale Hurston. And so kind of like how Marina was talking about this framing of Zora Neale Hurston as kind of the frame of our project, I thought it would be interesting to see, hey, can we recover some of these Black women writers through the PhiloLogic tool? So as I started to do these searches, I was able to actually find several women writers. So we decided to focus on these 3 women writers through our searches. We have Under the Cottonwood, a saga of Negro life in which the history, traditions, and folklore of the Negro of the last century are vividly portrayed, by Catherine Campbell Graham from 1941. We have Come Go With Me, High Rock and Spring Break by Mary Drummond from 1973. And The Rainbow Around My Shoulder by Linda Brown Bragg from 1984. And the numbers at the bottom you'll see is the number of times the word porch or porches occurs within the novel. So you can see 38, 37, 24. So a good number of times that they're referencing the use of the porch within their novels. So I think the PhiloLogic tool, this idea of zooming in and out, is really good in terms of, not just in terms of just doing metadata, but also of doing this recovery work of how can you locate writers that maybe, kind of building what Conrad's saying, it's not that they're being like purposely ignored or forgotten, but people don't know about it. So I think this tool is really great in that it can kind of help you find these other writers that maybe we don't know about, or, you know, time has passed, so then people are not reading them anymore. So how do we find them and understand what they're doing, which is so important. So kind of for my remaining time, what I want to do is kind of talk about Marina saying, this idea of zooming in, provide an excerpt from each of the 3 novels to kind of show how this idea of the porch is like kind of these third spaces. So I'll start first with Catherine Campbell Graham, Under the Cottonwood. Like I said before, it's a novel published in 1941. Just a little bit of background. The novel recounts several generations of the Stearns family as they head out west of Texas out of the Civil War. And kind of, it is told from the perspective of like this older female matriarch, and kind of retelling, you know, what her family had gone through since the Civil War up until like the present period of the early 20th century. So this excerpt I think is really great because it kind of shows how the porch becomes a locus of commerce within the African American community. And I'll read it just to kind of show that. The Longs then rented the store. They sold for cash. About 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Mr. Long, a little black spindle-headed man, would walk from one side of the porch to the other, throw his head back, cover one side of his mouth with his slim hand, and shout about his wares. Soon he had a crowd. They liked to hear him say, "Here's your spare ribs and Kansas City shawshits, hawks, and black-eyed peas, hot stage planks right here." The children in the neighborhood tried to have a nickel to buy a large hot ginger cookie, which is also referred to as a stage plank from earlier in the excerpt. So I think this is important because it's showing how the porch is being transformed into a public venue. It's a place of commerce and exchange for the local community. And it's also becoming like a democratic economic space where adults and children freely can come and go to purchase items they want, or even in the case of the children, purchase treats or goods in a way without feeling, any worry of being judged or being discriminated. So I think this is a very important example of that. The second example I wanted to show was from the second novel, Mary Drummond, Come Go With Me, High Rock and Spring Break. I think Spring Bank, sorry, not Spring Break. So this novel, it was published in 1973. And also I noticed within the PhiloLogic tool that the 1970s had the highest number of mentions of porch. It's not just her book, but a lot of the books that were published in the mid 70s. Why that is, I can't say, like in terms of why there were so many mentions of porches in the novels of that time period. This novel is kind of a coming of age story. It mentions a lot this character of Maggie. And in this scene, she's kind of on her porch with her father, who's kind of having this debate with her cousin. And it shows how the porch become a space of like political debate, political dialogue. And here I'll read the excerpt again. Even though Maggie was around the age of 8 or 9 years at the time, that day was still clear in her mind. There they sat, Cousin Bossy and Maggie's father on the back porch, screamed to keep out the flies, cats, and without success, the cunning blue. They were sharing a huge watermelon, which to an outsider would seem an almost total waste, but there was an abundance of these melons growing in the sandy lot near the meadow, and the remains were fed the pigs. Juice and seeds were flying, and so were the tongues of the thoroughly aroused cousins. Bossy was forever harping on the subject of the status of the poor Negro in the South. He would say, "You poor colored folks are just Uncle Toms, so contented with your miserable state. Then you should have gone with Marcus Garvey," Maggie's pop was saying. So I think this is kind of showing how the porch can become a venue for political discussions. And if we think of this ideas of the public sphere, Habermas talks about how the bourgeois class uses coffee houses and these elite spaces for political debate. And here I would like to use Houston Baker. He kind of counters this idea with the Black public sphere, how notions of spaces to do with the street, the church, the home can be transformed into an African American or Black public sphere, where ideas can be exchanged, discourses can be exchanged freely. And the text also kind of gives references to Marcus Garvey, which kind of points to the rise of Pan-Africanism and Black nationalism, especially during the first half of the 20th century. So showing how these kind of everyday spaces become central to these circulations and movements of ideas that are very important within the Black community. The final excerpt that I want to show is from Linda Brown Bragg, Rainbow Around My Shoulder. She's also known by her name, Linda Beatrice Brown. And she has actually been a professor at Bennett College, which is the private Black HBCU for women. This novel was published in 1984. She's actually known more as a poet than as a novelist. She was actually, if you look, there's actually an interview I found in the CLA Journal from the 70s that she did. And so she talks more about her poetry, about her influence from her mentor, who was Gwendolyn Brooks. And this novel is interesting too, because she specifically says that it follows in the tradition of Zora Neale Hurston, in particular Hurston's novel, Their Eyes Are Watching God. So again, you see a direct connection where she's kind of putting herself within this larger tradition of these kind of ethnographic fictional narratives. And this excerpt, it has the main character of the novel, Miss Flores, on the porch with another woman. And I'll read it real quick. Mama and Miss Flores on the front porch staring into the dark, screams made it easy to hear, or would have, except that Trudy was such a nuisance. You know she has TB, they muffled the last word as if the porch itself contained some white shirt authority that would punish them for just saying TB. And so this novel, it takes place between 1915 and 1954. It's about an African-American woman, Miss Flores, who feels the call to leave Louisiana to go to North Carolina to be a spiritual healer. And I think it's interesting because in this novel, the mentions of the porch show how this porch becomes a space of kind of Black women's sociability and Black women intimacy. And so the space becomes engendered in that way, and I felt in a very interesting way versus the other two novels. And so I think that's it's very important to kind of show the different contrasts between the three writers, but to show that how with this zooming out process of kind of looking at the larger trends, we can then identify certain writers and be able to zoom in and then see what is it they're doing that's so important. And in this case, to do with these spaces of the porch and how they're kind of part of a larger tradition that kind of follows in the steps of Zora Neale Hurston of using literature as a way to kind of chronicle and archive everyday Black life. And so the thing that we wanted to conclude with is kind of talking about this idea of why is this idea of zooming in and zooming out? Why is this idea of using these kind of DH projects and methods so important? And I think especially within the field of Black studies and African-American literature is extremely important because one, you have this idea of recovery. By using these tools, kind of like the HBW Corpus and the PhiloLogic tool, we can find these writers like these three that I was mentioning today. And then secondly, that can lead us to this idea of preservation. How can we preserve these writers? How can we make sure that the works stay relevant, moving forward, they're not forgotten. And then finally, through dissemination, through our own publications, through projects that we develop, whether they're digital or analog, to be able to share the importance of these works. It kind of building on what Conrad said too, making sure people are aware of it. People don't know about these writers. They don't know about these trends that had gone on in the past. So just make sure people are aware of what had happened and how they connect to what's going on in the present. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliseo. I know that certain people have to leave, and I just wanted to know if there was any pressing question before I move on to the last presentation, because we can all ask questions at the end, but I just wanted to know if anyone has a pressing question for Marina or Eliseo.
I sent my questions in as a chat, or my comments in as a chat, so I don't have to take any time. So when you all look down, you'll see something from me in terms of just adding a comment, so.
All right. Well, thank you. Sarah, Meese, and I will begin. Sarah, I'm going to introduce you. Let me go to my notes. Sarah, Meese, and I are presenting Virginia in Vernacular, a digital humanities framework for undergraduate research. Sarah Meese received her BA in Literature and Language and Political Science from Virginia Tech in 2018. She is the current Publishing Services Specialist within the University Libraries at Virginia Tech, where she has outreach and research responsibilities to support various digital humanities projects, and she supports any initiative through VT Publishing supporting academic and digital publishing as well. And I am Tyechia Thompson, a digital humanities postdoc associate in the Center for Humanities at Virginia Tech. I am a former AdHum scholar, because someone mentioned that, so I'm just going to mention that. I am a graduate of Howard University's PhD program, I believe in 2016. And that's about all I'm going to say about myself. Sarah, would you like to start?
Yeah, let me share my screen.
Okay.
For our project, we did a summer institute at Virginia Tech over last summer in June. We had about 9 students come to campus for a week. So the topic of this presentation is Virginia and the Vernacular, a digital humanities framework for undergraduate research. And there's our poster that we use that kind of shows some of our vernacular and the state. So the background of this project, we had about 9 students come to Tech for a week, and they stayed near campus. They had meals provided. It was a really awesome experience for them. We were able to give them a stipend. We recruited students from Virginia Tech and from different HBCUs around the state. And we recruited really interesting students that had different backgrounds and academic interests. So we had students who were interested in becoming teachers. We had students who were interested in working in mass communications and filmmaking. And so some really interesting perspectives on different digital humanities stuff they were learning. So we chose Virginia and the Vernacular as a way to engage students with the literature in the BBIP corpus and use the PhiloLogic database while also incorporating geography, which was our section that we were working in for the project. So the goals of the Institute are on the right, and we really wanted them to work within the corpus, look at literature, look at examples of literature they might not have seen anywhere else or have a chance to see anywhere else. And when Tyechia and I were going over topics and things we wanted to look at with them, there were a lot of references to Virginia. So we had to kind of work with the students to look at the database so they could see, when is it referencing the state? When is it referencing a name? What time period is this? So it was a really cool way for us to get more involved in this project and in the database and everything, but also engage our students in that. So over the course of the Institute, we introduced them to the project and the platform, just like basic research concepts. They were all older undergraduate students, so we had college juniors and seniors, so they could take on this kind of work, and they were kind of prepared for it, but we also had a chance to teach them more ways to do research and some different interesting topics within DH. So they kind of got to work within the database and all the literature we could share with them. And then at the end of the project, at the end of the week, they developed their own project using all of the information. So we gamified the Summer Institute so that students, every day they would come in, and as we would go over different topics, we would have them answer questions and do like have them share their perspective or share an answer to a question. And we would give out like gift cards. We were able to give them sessions with different people at Virginia Tech related to their interests. So if someone wanted to speak to someone who was engaged in their career field or what they thought they might want to go into, they were able to do like an hour-long Skype session with them after the Institute was over. So what we did, we had them get engaged with digital humanities by doing readings on it. We took some of the readings from the suggested readings for the BBIP project. So we shared with them basic digital humanities, Black digital humanities readings, like Kim Gallen, like digital humanities basics and different perspectives in the field. We also had them look at humanities and different ways they could use like data mining, and that was helpful in their projects. We were able to bring in Kenton Ramsey, who did an awesome presentation for our students. They got to see his Jay-Z mixtape project, which was extremely engaging and great for them to see, and kind of had them see how we can connect digital humanities to different topics and how data mining works, and it was very cool. We also brought in one of our librarians from Virginia Tech Craig Arthur, who demonstrated vernacular practices that are happening in rap and hip hop right now. And he played some, older rap music and some newer things the students knew. And it was really cool and got them thinking about vernacular practices and how they could look for older examples of those in the literature and see how they connect to rap music up to this day. So after learning about different DH topics and all the data mining and vernacular practices, they were able to develop their own project that could reflect things that they were interested in, and work with things that they were familiar with and relate Virginian vernacular to their interests to create a podcast, a video game, or an educational presentation. So Tyechia, you want to take over?
I can take over. So we literally took the BBIP expanding the reach aspect of it, literally, that if we could expand the reach by inviting more people to participate in using the HPW data set and using the PhiloLogic database. And so another reason why we felt like going with an undergraduate population would be useful in expanding the reach, because as far as I know, most digital humanities classes are offered for graduate students. And I felt like it was an opportunity to give undergraduates an insight to what possibilities they could have if they were interested in going to graduate school. Other options for them to consider if they're interested in English studies, then maybe going into a program that had digital humanities as a part of that curriculum. And so like Sarah was mentioning previously, the students had different backgrounds, and so their student projects represented those different backgrounds. The program was 1 week. They arrived on Sunday, they left on Friday, and we taught them the project. They spent 8 hours with us a day, and then they went back to their hotel. But during the day, we taught them how to use the platform, gave them examples of module examples of how to produce results quickly so they can create a project on day 5, kind of day 6. And the project was to do a 5 to 7 minute presentation. A lot of the presentations were much longer than this. It needed to provide an exploration from the history of Black writing novels database, and using the theme of Virginia and vernacular from the platform PhiloLogic. And once they had that, they also had to connect it to their major, their interests, or their career goals. And the projects that the students created represented that. So we had 2 students who wanted to be teachers, so they gave a presentation about how they would teach PhiloLogic moving forward to high school students, because they wanted to be high school teachers. We had a student who wanted to be a filmmaker, and another one who was in communications. It was unclear, and they were unclear about what they wanted to do. So they created a documentary using any terms that represented Nat Turner. So anytime Nat Turner was mentioned in the data set, they pulled all of that information to create a documentary about him, and then pulled visuals from online to complement the documentary. And I believe the documentary was about 7 minutes. The podcast episode was from a student who was in a previous class that I had taught how to use, how to create podcasts. And she worked with her teammate to create a podcast, because he was also in communications. And they felt like they had better voices, then they could do like video editing. And that podcast examined the term love in Virginia. So how is particularly Black love? They wanted to see if there were instances of Black love within the data set. And they had it was a great funny podcast about how they searched what came up, what didn't come up, about the process of creating or discovering the tool or not discovering what they intended to find with examining Black love in Virginia. And the other project was an 16-bit video game that examined historical Virginia, particularly the Norfolk area of Virginia. And it was one novel, I can't remember the name now, that it was set during the time period of this one novel, but pulling information from anywhere near Norfolk to build the world of the video game. The video game was probably about 15 minutes, you can get to the end, and it followed a male protagonist who had to go to work, and if he couldn't get on like the horse and buggy that was going down the street because, you know, he's African American. So it was a teaching tool about Virginia at that time. And so the students worked to include vernacular from the period that were appearing in the novels in the video game. The projects that we have here will be available tomorrow. They're going up in VTech Works. So, and VTech Work has to approve it before they make it available to the public, but everyone should be able to see the documentary, the video game. The video game is actually just a video clip of me playing the video game, because the file is just a video game file, and you would have to upload it onto a PC. It's not compatible with a Mac. Oh, Sarah, would you go to the next slide? I thought it was my screen. And the other thing we wanted to discuss, because our focus was on expanding the reach about how the students came in, we also did a survey. Took about maybe like a 10-minute survey for the students just to see what they got out of the process of coming to a week-long summer institute. We did incentivize it through, like Sarah said, providing the $500 stipend, providing housing, providing travel, that they needed, and also gamifying it so they could learn quickly. But here, the first question of the survey was, I knew about digital humanities prior to coming to the Digital Humanities Undergraduate Summer Institute, Virginia and Vernacular. And most of the students had not. So 5 of the students strongly disagree or disagreed with regard to having any knowledge about digital humanities. One student definitely had some knowledge about digital humanities, and one student was in the middle. I think that for the students that came to our program, even if they left and decided not to do anything with it, they came out knowing at least something, because we told them what digital humanities was. That's kind of like how we started. We talked about Virginia. All of them had a connection to Virginia. So either they lived in Virginia or they went to school in Virginia. All of them went to school in Virginia. They went to Virginia Tech, Norfolk State, Virginia Union, and Virginia State. So Virginia State, Virginia Union, let me make sure. Yep, Norfolk State and Virginia Tech. Sarah, the next slide, please. And this question here was regarding, it pretty much answered strongly disagree. So strongly disagree would be red, strongly agree would be yellow. And so the question is, I will create more art-based digital humanities frameworks. Most of the students strongly agree that they would. I will apply digital humanities methods in my future courses. Half of the students felt that way. Revise my project from the Digital Humanities Summer Institute for future use. Most of the students wouldn't come back and do that, because actually most of them finished it. And incorporate digital humanities practices into my career. Most of them would do that as well. And seek out more digital humanities opportunities. We have about half of the students saying that they would collaborate more with my peers. Pretty much all of them saying that they would do that, and improve digital tools for future scholars. Most of them said that. One of the students didn't reply to the survey that was online. She did a paper version of the survey. I think it was also awesome that we had students of different abilities at the Summer Institute, because it made us think about questions of accessibility and just different populations and how to make digital humanities work, how to teach it in a way that makes it relevant for everyone involved. And Sarah, I think this is the last slide. And as an outcome of the Institute, we also created a badge just to kind of make it official, like you did something, you spent some time, and it was very intensive. And so this is an overview of what the students gained. The badge earner gained introductory, theoretical, and applied research skills in the digital humanities field, and developed a network of peers while demonstrating they can support a digital humanities project through their exposure to the following areas: critical debates in DH, development of DH research questions, DH documentation methods, because they did learn how to document. So if the platform somehow glitched, they will be able to come back to where they were. Evaluation and critique of digital humanities tools. So every time they did something in the tool, they had to critique it, critique the tool, and critique their method to see if something needed to be changed about that. Critical interpretations of DH findings. So how did they interpret their findings? And then they also worked with their peers to think different ways about how they were interpreting those findings. And presentation of a preliminary DH research. And that was that final project that they produced. Badge earner was exposed to current important topics in digital humanities and collaborated with peers at other institutions to create a project that researched the theme Virginia and Vernacular in the history of Black writing novels, PhiloLogic platform. Overall, I think the Summer Institute was demanding, and it was not only on the students, but on Sarah, and I think I could speak in my time as well. I think I could speak for you in that regard, Sarah, because we were busy just keeping up with them even after they left the campus for the day. And I think it shows that we didn't really know the tool before having the Summer Institute. The tool was having the Summer Institute was in a sense to push ourselves to learn the tool quickly. And I am the kind of learner who learns through sharing or teaching. And so it was my way of saying, okay, I need to learn this. Let me teach it. And so that was our Summer Institute. I think we can stop sharing now, Sarah. Thank you.
All right.
And I'm gonna open up the talk to everyone. If you have any, how much time do we have left? We have a little over a half an hour, and wanted to open up the conversation to all of the groups. And if you have any questions, I feel like you should just say it, because it's so many people, I don't think I'll be able to see you and say anything. So if you could just say your name, and maybe a little like itty bitty, like if you are part of BBIP, Scholars 1, Scholars 2, or a visitor, that'll help kind of us contextualize who you are. Thank you. Anyone?
Well, I will just kick the conversation off by saying, in terms of all three presentations, what I really like is the way in which you think about method. Whether you're doing an education project, you brought into that domain how to do something. But what I was really excited about in this last presentation is that you can get students excited about doing something in a week's time, and they turn it around so fast. And often we complain about the disengaged students, the reluctant reader, and all the terms we've used to talk about students. But you've demonstrated that if you can create it in a way that makes use of their skills, pushes them to do more, and incentivize it, you call it gamified, incentivize, it really does work. So I mean, that was very impressive, but it was also methodologically driven, content driven. And so the application was very critical. You had all those components. They learned, they did, they produced, and were creative in producing something on their own, all in 5 days. What you described could easily have been a 2 or 3 week institute, but you did it in a week. And Sarah's shaking her head because she knows how we work at getting those 3 weeks, and it's a dogged experience, trust me. We're all worn to a frazzle by the end. So to do this in a week, I thought was really impressive. But for all of you, as I said, I think the idea of taking a big project and bringing it down to a size that you can manage. Eliseo, Marina, what you did, you had a big project. All along it was a big project, and yet you found a way to get through it. And I sent you another reference that would add to your discussion, because I think, and now I'm going to draw back on something that Conrad was always saying and always pushing, is that not only are we making these texts available, but we're also thinking about knowledge production or the Black intellectual tradition that doesn't get utilized either. So I was concentrating on bringing a book that I knew to the table that should be a part of what you're doing, because that is very problematic. We'll think that people have not written on this, but sometimes they have. And it doesn't have to be necessarily a project that specifically is DH driven, but it gives us content. And so we want to always think about the content as well as the methods that we can use to intersect. And this kind of intersection, I think, is what we want to always keep in mind, because this is intergenerational, it's intersectional, it's interdisciplinary. And all in all those ways, I think you were demonstrating that in all of the projects that I heard presented today. Doing a conference online. We bring people together. That conference, Rochelle, you've been thinking about that a long time, and now its time has come because we're social distancing. So there's no other way for us to do a conference right now except to do it that way. So I really appreciate the way you went large and small and practical and theoretical in terms of all of this projects. And it shows the immense possibilities for BBIP, both the PhiloLogic interface, individual projects you can come away with, and then passing on the tradition to another generation, which you have put in place. You know, I can imagine all that work the students did is going to have multiple lives, multiple iterations. It's going to work its way into more work that they do. So I'm excited about this, and that's just kind of by way of opening up some other conversations you might have, especially for cohort two. You're thinking about what possibilities are. I think you see what they've done, and some of you will work with some of these people, but also will want to do projects on your own. But I think these are great examples as models for what we can do. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
This is Ron Bailey, University of Illinois. I'm having some technical difficulties, so I hope I'm heard.
You are.
Very good. So there are two or three of us. I want to extend what Maryemma just said. It goes beyond BBIP, because there are several of us who are listening and studying what you're doing for the purpose of expanding what we're trying to do. And there are several of us online who are participants in the Afro Publishing Without Walls project. And we're very pleased that Tyechia was one of the 4 digital books we published this year. Some of you might be aware that Maryland should still be online, and others. But sometimes I'm so amazed at things that I see or experience. My summation is one word: wow. And I find myself saying, wow, with what you've done here today. It is a very deep dive into Black intellectual history, something that's not often paid attention to, even when some of the things that people are trying to do now, town gown, that sort of thing, interdisciplinary studies, you know, things that Black studies actually helped to pioneer and popularize. Somehow Afro studies gets lost when it's summarized. So it's really good to see the implications of what you're doing. And specifically, the project that we are involved in was funded by Mellon. And Mellon has invited us back for a second round of funding. And what we're thinking about now and trying to fashion is how we build a broader collaboration of those of us who operate, you know, working with the digital and Afro studies. And Tyechia knows that I was very excited to hear her describe before the workshop with the students, because one of the things we see doing is trying to gather funds where we could reproduce what you did at Virginia Tech to 10 or 15 sites around the country, where, you know, we can have train-the-trainer workshops to help people learn how to do it, and then introduce it to students in pretty much the way you've done. And so that's you know, one example that I applaud. Another one would be what we want to do with expanding digital publications. One of our main tasks was to work with digital tools that would allow museum exhibits or journal publication or book publication, and have a suite of tools that can be used. And what you guys present are a lot of possibilities of being able to give your work, you know, give the novels that you're looking at a broader global audience. And this is not just something we want to do for scholars. And I'll just, you know, mention a couple examples. There were there's a community-based group of citizens in Conant Gardens in Detroit that did a wonderful history of this East Side community, the first community where Black people could buy houses. They wanted to give the book that was published to all the incoming freshmen in Detroit public schools. They couldn't do it because of the cost, but we can do it if it's done digitally. So the idea of being able to collect local Black history that scholars are doing, but importantly that community groups are doing, and be able to make that available to a wider audience is something we want to try to pay attention to. One last thing, we had planned this series of visits to all of the conferences operating, you know, spring and summer, so that we could talk to people about our project and get feedback, and COVID-19 knocked that out. But I must tell you, I applaud you, because this is a good opportunity for us to fine tune what we're trying to do, and then to be in touch with you to ask you how we might reshape what we're trying to do so that it serves your interests. So I applaud your efforts. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Bailey. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't know who's speaking, but I'm gonna be quiet.
That's Marilyn.
Okay.
I wanted to piggyback on what Ron was saying. I sort of mentioned it earlier in a chat with Maryemma, and I just see an excellent opportunity for this panel grouping here that we saw here today. And I wanted to propose an idea to you, and you guys can think it over, try to work out any details. But I thought that these papers and presentations could be published together in a scalar site that could be titled maybe BBIP and Beyond or something like that. That through the Afro-PWW site, which is one of the series in the iOpen project out of the University of Illinois. So since many of the projects are already in Scalar, which I thought was fascinating to see that already, that this could easily be done very quickly and then publicized. The site itself could be divided up into whatever kind of sections that you guys saw would be appropriate. For example, the publication section, teaching tools and pedagogy section kind of thing, recovery work and methods, whatever way that you saw your work coming together as a whole for this. The Scalar site can be divided up into those kinds of categories for the publications that you have. And I don't know if Dan is still on or not, but I think that it could be set up where as you go along, you could continue to add to this site if that's what you wanted to do. So that's an idea I'm throwing out.
And Dan, I do see Dan still on the in the conference. I don't know if he wants to say anything, but we did have a question from Danashari. Let me know. I hope I didn't say it wrong. But I think it's a good segue to this question is a good segue from what you just said, Marilyn. Danashari's question is, will the panelists be taking these projects further? And and I'm going to kind of extend that, was anyone else thinking about publishing their findings or doing something like Marilyn has suggested?
Well, Seretha, you have the journal Third Stone, and I know that a lot of your work is connected to that. So I think the idea that there are these options available and this rich work coming out, we never want to be absent from opportunities. Mm-hmm. And so I can see work in progress, work in stages,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and definitely a Scalar project that presents this as a collective. You saw that I again put one of my intellectual properties out there by saying that just hot off the press is the proceedings from the Black Love Symposium that celebrated the 60th anniversary of Their Eyes Are Watching God. And Eliseo and Marina, you actually started with that with Hurston. And so now there are proceedings, and that in fact goes into popular culture, it goes into film, it goes into all the other areas. So I do think I can see we're at various stages and lots of things can be done at various stages. So I like all of these ideas, but I wanted to put it out to Seretha because I know you've been thinking long-term that way anyway, Seretha, how to get things in stages, because sometimes we think a project has to be absolutely finished and perfect before we put it out there.
Yeah, so we designed our project intentionally to continue to build, you know, kind of a continuing the conversation. And so, you know, I invite everybody to, if you have some keywords that you want to insert into the files that we have, if you identify other texts in the BBIP, HBW database, you know, we want to have that. And then we want people to actually do something. So I'm hoping that what we've begun here will encourage people to maybe kind of, you know, write papers or do other kinds of projects, you know, using those, using the materials. And so that was really the whole scope of what we were attempting to do is, you know, what can we do to generate this scholarship and to also really kind of reclaim those texts also. I think that was maybe the theme that ran through the presentations today is this whole idea of recovery. And so that we're absolutely trying to recover, and not just to recover for the sake of recover, but saying like, hey, these are texts that we can actually, you know, do something with, and they have merit, and we can tie them to contemporary things, or we can use them to reframe other ideas. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great idea to think about maybe a digital publication, you know, putting together all of these presentations into one place, and then continuing to work on it. Conrad and I were already kind of texting back and forth saying, you know, we're not done. So we already know we're not done.
One of the things that we were discussing on the chat, and I wanted to kind of throw out as a possibility, is that all these projects could be reviewed by Reviews in Digital Humanities. They take projects at any stage. And I think it's a great way to not only get people to know your project, but to get some feedback. And it's a way to also have some sort of external peer review to help give you credit at any stage of the work. So I'd strongly suggest you all look at it. I tweeted in the chat the link. And one of the folks who works on that is Rupika Rizam, and she's really interested in making sure that digital projects about Black text are presented more fully than they generally do in the larger digital humanities kind of cloud.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, visibility continues to be, or I should say invisibility continues to be a problem. And that's one of the things that we are trying to address. In other words, having space and place matter in terms of how your work gets out there and how the community that you're a part of continues to expand, which of course is the purpose that Sarah and Tyechia that drove what they were doing, getting people younger, getting undergrad students, and certainly thinking about students at HBCUs who are pretty much in the proximity and they can work across those institutional lines in terms of doing work. So yes, and I think also the model is work's not finished, but work can still go into some form for sharing, even if it's not finished and perfect. We do have a perfectionist Jones in us. I'm guilty of it. Totally guilty of it. It's got to be best. It's got to be right. Don't put it out there. But I think that the evolutionary nature of the work that we're doing and the importance of the recovery side of it. For instance, evaluative criticism has been the biggest, I'd say, problem in much of the work that we've been doing. Evaluative criticism. Is it good or is it bad? If it's bad, we don't want to talk about it. What you've just provided is another way to think about introducing material other than through an evaluative mode. That is, it doesn't get to be canonized because it hasn't been evaluated by people to be valuable. You're showing value in very different ways. Books that you never heard of before. We can see them, the word cloud, that was fantastic. Adding to our understanding of what something is, books that we would never think about reading because they have value in a different way now. So revaluing, perhaps, rethinking about value, thinking about it in a new way, I think is really important here. So yeah. So Seretha said that she and Conrad said they were going to keep doing. What about the rest of you? Where do you see your next stage? May I ask you that question?
We've been on this amazing journey since last January, right? That's my first entry in all of this. And we had this project, I had this vision of this mapping Black travel in time and space. And I had this giant vision of everything that could be that was not realistic, of course. And then we had originally planned to focus on connections between Latin America and the Caribbean and the US. And then we realized, oh, that project, this wasn't the right time for that project. And so I want to tell people that are the new round of scholars that we did go through lots of stress and lots of transition. And it was always, we communicated with each other and learned ways to communicate, but it wasn't always smooth. And sometimes there's disagreements, right? Anyways, so where we've come is we went from this global thing that I had envisioned into focusing on the local. I'm so excited to be able to, that we could present this here today. And that I like this idea of being able to continue to build, right? So this is just like the first step in something that's going to grow, that started out with a big idea a year ago, and we had to scale back, but we still have that on the back burner in terms of where we want to go and what we want to do. And we've also utilized this year the different meetings we've had to kind of use that to fertilize our own ideas of how we think of things, to make connections. And for me in particular, because I love to be on teams, but I'm a very introverted and individualistic kind of person. And so this is the first time I felt like I'm in this web of people in the humanities working together. That's been a really beautiful experience. Did you want to tell me about the article?
Oh yeah, and like Marina's saying, like kind of like this is the first stage. Yeah, in terms of what we're building. So like the Digital Humanities Quarterly, they have a special issue, a call for papers on between DH and me, the rising generation of Black DH scholars. So our proposal was tentatively accepted. So we hope, so this, what we presented today, we hope that we'll have like a draft of that by the, because the deadline is the end of June for us to submit the draft of our article. So hopefully this will be like the immediate stage right now. And like Marina's saying, from that article, hopefully we can continue to build on it and do like these larger kind of more global projects that we initially envisioned as well too.
And that project's connected to what we're doing today, but what we did today, but also what I envision is this idea, actually with that project is the same kind of issue, this mapping out of a Black intellectual tradition, right? And what that's contributed to scholarship in general, what people draw on. If I think of Zora Neale Hurston as an anthropologist, that's who I was like, that should be the first person we go to, right? That should be someone who's like really up there in terms of representation and dealing with communities. And even in her writing, I find her writing to be so theoretical, even though she's not calling on theory in this westernized way. And I feel that's something that's so sad to me because it's lost, because people will say, you know, oh, and maybe I identify because I feel I'm a very strong writer as well, right? So it's like, oh, you're not theoretical, but yes, it is. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not an underlying theory that's being embodied. Anyways, so for that one, for that DH quarterly that we're doing, we had come up with a list, and that was our word cloud that we had showed, this list of all these names of people who have gone before, and tracing that back in time. So that's really like the vision I have for that article. Yes, I'm done speaking. Thank you.
I hope that. This is Ron Bailey again. There's an implication of what you just said involving other disciplines, and that was one of the fascinating things about your presentation today. My work has been on the slave trade and the rise of industrial capitalism in Great Britain and the US. You might know the book Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery. And that book has been at the center of a controversy for decades, in part because the theoretical foundations and the empirical findings and the implication that Black people contributed to the industrialization of the world is not something that goes well with a lot of people. And so it's not just that these books are ignored because people don't know about them. Sometimes they're ignored because people don't agree with you and will try in every way possible to block that knowledge from being spread. And I think we shouldn't lose the political interpretation of some of the challenges that Black scholarship and Black intellectual history and Black colleges have faced. And so one of the implications for me, just like you had the BBIP database, right? I'm sitting here thinking about my use of the database that came out of the Du Bois Institute that Skip Gates and Eltis did that has this data on slave ships and so on. I mean, we could repurpose some of the databases that are available to have an interesting discussion and how did somebody said it in your presentation, kind of a re-envisioning of where some of these topics fit into a broader narrative that would, I think, be very useful. The same thing is true with Kenton's work. I mean, your projects are raising some implications that I think can be shared and spread to other sub-disciplinary fields of Black studies, if you will, and have a really important impact on students and on pedagogy and so forth.
Hi, this is Jada from cohort 2, Jada Bradley. I had a couple of comments for Eliseo and Marina. Well, first of all, you're in DC, so you made me think about Eatonville, the restaurant that's no longer there. They had a porch there, and that was the most sought after booth, was to get on the porch booth. Everyone wanted that booth, and you couldn't really get into that one very often. And you know, you're porching and porches and commerce and money, and this is a restaurant that, you know, everyone wanted to sit on the porch at the restaurant, which was just such a very interesting thing, because it's a fabricated porch, not a real porch. It's fabricated, but we all wanted to be there. And as far as continuation of your project, I also thought about a friend of mine who is originally from Miami, recently posted something online about how they close the ventanitas in Miami and people cannot go have their chisme and their charla and their talk and their coffee. And so I hate to bring up the coronavirus cloud that's kind of hanging over us, but as far as your project in the future goes, you might actually be looking at the loss of some of these spaces that we all are going to face, whether the loss is just the social loss or the economic loss or whatever it is, because some of these spaces are going to change if and when they come back. So those are just a couple of thoughts. I really enjoyed all the presentations though. Thank you.
Thank you. That was, I didn't expect that, but it makes sense and is very thought-provoking. Jada's comment. We have 11 minutes left. I didn't know if Sarah or Maryemma, if you had some comments like a big wrap up. So I didn't know if we should take a few more questions or if you had like an outro.
Are there other questions?
Okay.
I mean, I could do it in a minute. Sarah may have some announcements or something. I could do what I want to do in a minute. So
I have no announcements, so go until the end.
Okay.
I have a brief question. This is Jamisha from Howard University. I'm in the second cohort. So my question is about methodology. I was really fascinated by the different ways you all approached your project in terms of methodology. And I'm just wondering if you encountered any significant challenges in your methodology. So anything that, you know, made you sort of pause and have to reassess or find a different direction into your topic.
Okay, I will mention this because it happened. I've taught this BBIP, the PhiloLogic twice to graduate students and during the Summer Institute. And the documentation is important, especially if you're working with someone else, because the students got different results based on the same word in their findings. And what I had the students do was say what you searched and put the link to that search. So for instance, if we search something right now, let's just say Virginia Vernacular, because that's on my mind, and you searched it and you're like, I don't have anything. And I searched it and I have like 40 findings, the 40 things came up for me. If I gave you my link and I actually documented it, I can share my link with you so you can get my findings. And so that's why documentation was so important to their process, because it's still kind of in a beta phase. And if you want to make sure the results are consistent across the board, that everyone has to kind of document how they're going about the search and what the search is bringing up for them. It's an extra step, but I think is worth it based on what the students experience together.
I will mention that Sarah agreed to do, and this will be, Sarah knows this already, Sarah Meese, who was with Virginia Tech team, that we do need to have a manual to learn how to use the PhiloLogic. We discovered in the process that we needed to be taught differently. So Sarah said, okay, I know how to do this. That's what I do for a librarian. I know how to make this happen. So we said, please, please, thank you, that we will have. So each of you is contributing in a different way. And I think the documentation that we need will also help to figure out how to make better use of the tools that we have at our disposal. The request that I have of everybody, because I like what Marilyn has said, if we could have a scaffold of what each project is. It does not have to be the full meshing and of everything, but a scaffolding of those projects, I think can help the next cohort in terms of see how things evolve, but also can give a bird's eye view of what this first cohort has produced. So I'm sure Marilyn can figure out for us how to make that work, but I would like to see something that's the scaffold of each of the projects that we have today and tomorrow, and some later on that will come in the form of white papers or whatever. But if you can think about the way that you can create a capsule of your project, so to speak, that shows maybe an example of one of the things that you do so that people have a taste of it and they see, but to leave things in a sense unfinished and show possibility is also exciting.
Thank you. Any other responses to Jamisha's question before we close?
I'll say something. So one of the things that I did realize, the database is growing always. And so when we ran our search initially, we had different numbers. And then like recently we ran it again and got some different numbers. And so that's one of the things that you'll have to just kind of pay attention to, that some of the text, will be added, to the digital database. And so you have to just kind of keep that in mind. I mean, it didn't necessarily throw us off, but, we certainly would have missed some of the text. I realized, I was like, oh, okay, so we didn't have these texts when we initially ran our search. So that was just something that I wanted to mention.
Yeah, and then one other thing too, just a final thought, kind of what Marina was talking about earlier in her presentation was this idea of grounded theory. I think it's really important too, because I feel especially with the DH projects, when you're like diving into these corpuses, you might have a certain idea of what you're thinking you're wanting to find, but as you start doing your searches, other stuff will happen. For example, with our project, we were thinking this idea of porches and games of chance, of saying, oh, maybe there's ideas to do with like dice and gambling. But as I'm searching, I'm finding there's not that connection, but then there's other connections. So I think you always have to have that kind of openness of like, you might have certain ideas of what you're hoping to find, but as you start your searches, other things will emerge, or you might not find out at all what you're looking for. But just kind of let your search go where it takes you. And then, because I felt at the end of the day, you're still going to find really insightful ideas, very insightful information that you didn't think of before. So just having that kind of more open process is very important when you're kind of using these kind of digital corpuses and databases.
It's good if you're comfortable with chaos, right? Where if you're just like, everything's a big, it's so messy, like, let's make it messier. Isn't that amazing? And that messiness, and then sometimes there's anger or fear to do with messiness. That comes back to, what you're talking about coronavirus, like it's a similar process of this messiness, and then we clean it up for you for today. And then after today, we're gonna go let it get messy again. So that's my ending statement.
I just wanna just give a shout out here. We have three people who have joined us. One of the persons you know already, it's Jade Harrison, who has worked with us, taking over from Arnold, who was asked some of the first questions. So Jade is here, but also Alejandro is here, who is our newest member of the BBIP staff at the home site, and Nyla Wansley, who is our graduating senior from high school, who's been working diligently now for over a year with us. So we're really pleased to see some of our younger scholars who are first-year college students and going to college who are participating with us. So thank you, Nyla and Alejandro, for being here today. I'm just looking at the names. I didn't see all the names at first, so I want to thank them.
And Dr. Ram, we have 3 minutes. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I will send out the email with the link for tomorrow's meeting as soon as we log off today. So look for that.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow for those who are coming.